Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new series of videos that we're doing where we want to go and talk about some of the deeper issues that we face in life. Obviously, the world is crazy right now, and there's all kinds of stuff happening in the world. And sometimes, on a Sunday during a preach, we don't get to dive super deep into a lot of practical real life issues. And so we wanted to put this out there to help give expression to a lot of the stuff that we're just wrestling with as a society and even wrestling with as like individuals trying to comprehend life in the world today and be able to talk a little bit more in depth about that. And so this is us talking about real life and specifically how God applies to real life in this craziness of life. And so I've got my really good friend Mike DeDominic with me today, who is going to help facilitate the conversation. And Mike is one of the most incredible people I know because he is super intelligent and smart and also an incredible part of our team at Amplify. And so he's here to help facilitate the conversation. I've been asked a lot of questions over this past year around, 2020 has been so insane. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what does this mean as far as like, is God going to end the world? Like, what's happening? And so I thought, let's just talk about what's happening in our world today. Yeah. So, yeah.
Cool. So you kind of set up a lot of what we were going to talk about right there.
Yeah.
So what? Wildfires,
Yeah.
a pandemic, crazy political season.
Or is it a pandemic?
I mean, what is true?
What is true?
Who
Right?
knows what's happening?
Are there fires?
Honestly, you go online, you don't even know.
You don't
sometimes.
even know, right?
So I guess the best
That's
way
a
to
joke, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that the wildfires are a hoax. I'm not
But
saying
some
that-
people are.
Right, I know.
That's you go online, you can find an opinion that's literally completely the opposite of any other opinion you can find.
For sure.
So, how do you even navigate what you believe is real?
That's so hard. I mean, first of all, we live in a world where what is true is not even a factor anymore.
Yeah.
Like no one in the world is agreeing on what is even true right now. And I think that that's unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there were, I hate the word unprecedented. Can I just say I'm sick of the word unprecedented? I was on a Zoom call earlier today and it started off like this. This year has been unprecedented for all of us. I'm like, the fact that you said that, I just want to turn it off. It was a really good Zoom call.
So it's that in a fluid situation.
Yeah.
I can't stand that. Every situation now
It's
is a fluid situation.
Like, what does that even mean? I hate it. Can it not be fluid for a minute? Yeah. Anyway, so I think that what's so interesting about the world that we live in is that there is no accepted version of reality. Mm-hmm. And so how do we understand life and reality? Well, we're going to sources to try and help us figure out how to make sense of the world that we're living in. Mm-hmm. Every single one of us are doing that. But the sources that we go to aren't authoritative sources, So, I mean, I love that you asked that question. Rewind the clock, even just like when I was in high school, right, in the 90s, no one was on the internet.
Yeah.
And there was always sort of this idea that the media outlets had some level of political bias to them, but there were authoritative sources for information, right? And when the internet popped up, that's really gone away, especially not just the internet, but social media companies. Mm-hmm. I mean, the internet just made information more available, but social media companies have actually manipulated our thinking for their own gain.
Sure.
And so because of that, there is no accepted version of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you go onto Facebook, if you're looking at information about racial injustice, the truth is that you are not being fed unbiased or factual information about racial injustice, because Facebook has an algorithm built into it to feed you what Facebook thinks you are going to pay longer amounts of attention to.
Yeah, the incentive isn't truth anymore. The incentive is engagement.
Right, absolutely. So Facebook isn't giving you information that it considers to be factual. In fact, these social media companies have made great attempts on legal grounds to argue that they should not be considered to be publishers, and they shouldn't have any responsibility for their information because they're not publishers, they're just platforms. And so they've made these arguments even in our judicial system to say we're not publishers, so we can't be held accountable for the information on our platform. We're just publishers. The problem with that is, and they're speaking out of two sides of their mouth, the problem is that they've got algorithms that are creating a world where they know Mike the Dominic's interests. They know the posts that you stop to look at for longer than another post, and they're feeding you things that you will pay attention to. Not that are true, but just that you'll pay attention to, because the longer you spend time on Facebook, the more money that they get for selling ads to you.
Absolutely.
So,
So like, what do you do with that? Like, I was just having this conversation earlier.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like you have to have some anchor point or some like grounding or some common acknowledgement of at least this much we can agree on to even have the conversations about everything else. Like, I just don't. I think 2020 more than anything has shown polarization to an extreme and a lack of ability to have a conversation that is empathetic to what the other person is saying, as opposed to just immediately assuming that the other person is evil and has evil intentions, and it just instantly creating an enemy out of the opposite, as opposed to just disagreeing.
Well, but that's just another product of what we just said about social media companies. Like, what gets your attention? Well, the most emotionally charged ideas are what get attention.
Yeah, they spread way quicker.
They spread way quicker. And honestly, even if you don't agree with it, you're more prone to stop and look at a news article or stop and look at a post or stop and look at a tweet that is emotionally charged. Like, you're more prone to stop and look at that. So the way that social media companies have formed their algorithms to get you to stop and look at things is not that different than how the news media is working now at the same time. I mean, they've got apps in there. The news.
Well, the news is honestly trying to keep up with social media.
Right, exactly.
I think they're now realizing they have to switch the way they're doing things.
Right, exactly. So they're not trying to get you facts. They're trying to get you to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
So they're going to send you emotionally charged things. So here's the thing. I can't say to someone, maybe who's different than me politically, we disagree on this topic. I can't, because I don't have any voices in my life telling me that there are valid reasons for people to disagree on topics. There's no voice in my life telling me that. The only voice in my life is, and I'm talking about like in the media, but that's where we get all of our information. The only voices in my life are telling me inflammatory things about topics that they think I want to hear about. So of course we're going to look at each other as enemies, and of course we're going to demonize each other because I just spent an hour on Facebook, I mean, not me personally, but take an example, hearing about why all Democrats are, murderers, right? Like, I just spent an hour. So if I come across you and you're like, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm like, oh my God, like, who are you? Like, I already don't like you because I've just been told all of these things about who you are and what you stand for that make me want to throw up. But I was fed that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just, on the way over here, actually was listening to a podcast where they were talking about stopping and pausing, and they said naming your anxieties and naming the anxiety of who you would see you're opposing. So like when someone has an opposing opinion, are you able to name what, even if it's on your side of things, what you think that their fear is driving that anxiety? So that way you're recognizing where that person's coming from. Even if you disagree, you're able to empathize with that person and then have a conversation. So like, do you have what do you do? Like, how are you staying sane?
Dude,
I thought that was a great...
How am I staying sane in the year 2020? Can I just be honest with you? Barely hanging on. And I feel like maybe that's everybody, right?
To an extent, for sure.
So the Zoom call I was on earlier, which used the word unprecedented. It was a collection of pastors who are all leading churches that would be considered to be large churches all across America, and there were maybe 15 of us or something, and the topic was, how can we make sure that we're not losing it? Because if we lose it, everyone in our churches won't have leadership to help them not lose it, right? And so the point of the conversation was, so guys, like, are you losing it? And I think that so we're facing all of these major crises. And I mean, let's just be honest about the fact that there are major crises that we're facing, but you drop all of these crises into an environment where we can't agree on facts, we can't agree on truth, and every single outlet that feeds us information has a vested interest in feeding us inflammatory information for the sake of our engagement.
Yeah.
And so you put that down in the middle of it, and here's what you get. Massive spike in suicide rate, massive spike in people who are admitting that they're depressed and anxious, massive, emotional trauma. Here's what I was looking for. Massive increases in opioid usage, overdoses. I was talking to someone who's in law enforcement here in Pittsburgh. And this is anecdotal, so this is not like a piece of data, but he said he works specifically in dealing with narcotics and that sort of thing. The first week of lockdown, he said that before lockdown happened, in our general area, our city, you'd see maybe 2 overdoses a week, which is terrible. It's awful. Yeah. He said the first week of lockdown, they started getting calls 4 and 5 overdoses a day.
That's insane.
A day. Now, I think that there needs to be legitimate, honest, non-inflammatory conversations about whether or not our response to the pandemic was fed by fact or fed by inflammatory emotion. I think that we should really have that conversation. But I think that one thing that we can all agree on is that we're not doing well. And whether or not the lockdown was the correct decision or whatever, I think we really need to look at that. Yeah. But we can't even ask that question. Because even to ask the question, people are gonna be like, you don't believe and everyone's dying, or it's like, no, like we should have an honest conversation about what we did and whether or not that was the right thing to do and whether or not what we're doing is still the right thing to do, and let's talk about that with actual facts. But we're incapable of doing that right now. We can't do that. But regardless of all of that, like if we just shelve all of that, and it's a huge can I just opened, but if we could shelve that for a moment, the truth is that we're not doing well, and that's true across the board, and every single one of us have had to figure out how to cope and how to try to not go completely under.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, isolation is just it's where people fall apart, and I think we've gotten into this rhythm of thinking, well, I'm not isolated because I can reach out to people online and stuff like that. But I still feel like that's a level of isolation, digital aside. I mean, I think that's just going to be with us forever. That's not the point. But when you are reaching out to people in such a like a feedback loop of your own group, and you're only hearing your own thoughts just regurgitated from someone else, I think that's still another form of isolation. Like I think this world is so connected now, but we are still choosing to stay within our own little corners of the internet. So like you just rile yourself up.
We're more connected than ever, but that connectivity hasn't made us more loving. It's made us more tribal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
I don't know that Mark Zuckerberg could have seen that coming, but they definitely did things to make it that way.
Well, I think they saw incentives. And
incentives,
they went after that
for their company.
And that's what anyone would do.
That's what anyone would do.
Not on anyone, but that's the natural.
And I'm not sticking up for him or trying to throw him under the bus. It's just stating reality.
He's playing the game. I mean, there's definitely arguments.
He's doing what every single business owner would do, which is grow your business.
Yeah. So there's probably things regulations that could be put in place to change that. But
there probably should be, right? But also, if we lose our morality, this is what happens.
So there's probably a level of just on our as the user end of things, recognizing what's the game is, and so we can what is our part in it, and how are we going to interact with that?
I know it's like you get a dopamine rush when someone likes your post. Well, I mean that's just fact, because it feels like attention. And I preached about this a few weeks ago, but we've mistaken attention for love. And we've interpreted attention, and now that we've been through this year where almost all of our interaction was digital, the problem is that we're getting dopamine rushes constantly from things that aren't real love. They're just attention. And
it's kind of interesting. It's almost the same thing. The incentive
is just the incentive for us.
Yeah.
is the dopamine rush. Because if you log on to my Facebook Live, it gives me a dopamine rush. And I mean, maybe I should explain dopamine for a second. It's a chemical in your body that it's the pleasure chemical, right? And I'm not a biologist, so there's a lot more detail to it. But it basically makes you feel elated, and it is meant to be somewhat addictive because God gave us this in order to drive us towards things that are healthy and fulfilling. It's the same chemical that gets released when you have sex, and so you get that chemical when someone likes your post or someone pays attention to what you're putting out there online. And what that does, though, is that makes us run towards relationally things that feel like relationship but aren't real relationship. And so I can get a ton of attention and I can know 50 details about your life, but that doesn't mean that I've ever really connected with you. And it doesn't mean that I've ever really seen you. And so back to your point about empathy, we live in a world where there is no empathy. We don't look at each other. We don't see each other. Empathy is when you understand someone. We don't even get close to empathy because we don't even take the time to look at someone. And part of the reason why is because we don't, as people, we don't allow people to see who we really are. Because one of the other problems with the digital world is that I mask who I am. So I'm not authentic online, and no one is. And I as someone who believes in Jesus, I want to be authentic. But the truth is that the medium of online relationship isn't authentic by existence. I'm on a Zoom call with pastors, and I pull myself up. I'm looking at myself, and what is the first thing I'm doing? Like fixing my hair. Wait, is the light like on my face? Like I don't want to wash out my face. Why? Because there's an incentive to present myself in the best way. And that's always been there. Like we've always wanted to present ourselves the right way, but now almost all of our relationships exist in a space where we have so much power to manipulate who we are. So we don't have any empathy because one, we don't have a platform for vulnerable relationships anymore. We don't have a platform to be honest about who we really are. And so you see all of these terrible statistics about what is going on emotionally and mentally for people in the year 2020. Therefore, we don't have empathy for people. Because I don't hate Mike, but you could probably fit into 7 different categories of people who I've been told I should hate. Right? But I don't ever interact with Mike. I only interact with Mike on a digital platform where you fit into a category.
Or even further, you interact mostly probably with platforms that you already have a bias towards going along with. So you're not even going to see my point of view on things or understand where some of my point of views might be coming from.
Right, and we can't talk about it. Because we don't even have the opportunity to talk about it. Because when I go on Facebook or whatever platform I use to talk to you on, if the algorithm knows that you and I don't agree on something, it will pull us apart and it won't allow us to interact.
Or you just mute me because I'm annoying you.
I've never muted you, Mike.
So what do you do? So like, what is the Jason Howard way of doing this? I mean, it seems
of being healthy
Yeah, I mean,
emotionally,
it seems like right now you either just delete all your social media.
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
Some of the best people I know aren't on social media, to be honest. But
I'm considering it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to lose relationships with people either, right? That's the other side of it, right?
Because it can be healthy if
healthy
used appropriately.
Yeah, for sure. I get messages on Instagram a lot of times on Sundays talking about here's what Jesus did in my life this week, and it's like I want that, and this person has no platform to tell me that message any other way, right? Like they don't have my phone number and they don't know my address, right? Like so I like that. I don't want to lose that, but I think that I've become a little too overly reliant on digital interaction, but we've had no other option this year.
Well, yeah, 2020. I mean, 2020, you just throw everything out the.
But you can't, right? We lived through it. It's affected our thinking. It's affected our behavior. It's affected the way we understand the world. You can't just say everything will go back to normal.
Sure. Well, and I mean, 2019 was still
all these problems still
existed.
existed.
So we're just really, I think, amplifying the magnifying the problems. Yeah,
Right.
they're already there.
And I've heard it said, through this year, and again, it's one of those things where it's like, I've heard it, I don't want to hear it again, but crisis is an accelerator. So crisis doesn't necessarily create a bunch of new things. It just accelerates things that were already happening to begin with.
Sure.
And I think that that's part of it. You'll never be emotionally healthy if you are not ever in a situation where you're honest and vulnerable with another person.
Never be emotionally healthy if you're not
in a situation where you can be honest and vulnerable
Yeah.
with another person. And I would be willing to bet that the majority of people in our society right now don't have really anyone who they're truly honest and vulnerable with. And the way that we interact with people today has made it so that it's nearly impossible to be honest and vulnerable with
you don't
another
have
person.
to be online.
You don't have to be online, but
So you just fix what is wrong with you. Whatever you think is wrong, what your problems are online, you just mask them and.
oh yeah,
address
you don't
them.
have
Yeah.
to be. You don't have to be honest online.
Yeah.
No, of course not. And you'll find someone to agree with you, and you'll find someone to justify your own problems. So then you feel fine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't lead to happiness. It does lead to depression. It does lead to anxiety. And I mean, maybe for some people, getting off social media is a great idea. I think I like to view social media as a platform to help people. And I hope that my accounts do that. So I have an agenda on social media, which is to help people. And in the midst of all of this disgustingness, to be a voice that maybe can offer some hope and some peace and ultimately point people to Jesus, right? So I want to keep that there, but it's not for me to connect with people as much as it's for me to influence people. Like it's a platform for influence. But then the question is, who am I honest and vulnerable with?
Yeah.
And how can I will never be happy unless there's someone or people who I can really trust to be honest and vulnerable with.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, that's not normal or natural anymore. Like I would say for me, but I think for almost everybody.
Yeah, it's not. I think I don't want to make it just about guys, but I think guys especially
guys,
have
for
a hard time with that. I'd much rather just not have a conversation about something and move on.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But,
But are girls better at that? I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a girl. I shouldn't speak to it. But
Yeah.
like, I mean, it's easy to pretend no matter
Sure.
what gender
At least
you are.
maybe I should say like this: the stigma is that guys are.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
like,
Right,
so then
right,
you
right.
almost want to play into that, like live that out because that's what you think that you're supposed to be as a guy or something.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Being vulnerable, almost like I'm a verbal processor.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
if I'm not talking something out loud, sometimes you just kind of get into your own, get in your head, and it just spins out of control. Like
Yeah.
whatever thought you're
Totally.
So having someone that you can be vulnerable with that can then respond and maybe give you a different perspective than what you have inside your own head
Yeah.
is helpful. And I think that's a great parallel with the polarization of the world. Like we're
Right.
not talking to people that disagree with us in a way
Right.
that we can have a conversation that changes both of us a little bit. It's
Right.
always talking to someone, at someone, to
Not
convince
with
them.
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. So yeah, that's the world that we live in. So I think one other thing that we should really be aware of, because I think that what we're talking about is one of the really big underlying problems and solutions to like weathering this storm. Like if we can have healthy relationships, we'll overcome it. But one of the reasons why life is so hard right now is that we don't, right? So that's a huge thing that we talk about. But I also think that we really need to understand that 2020 put every single one of us into flight or fight mode. And basically when you experience distress or a threat, you are going to, by God's good design, either go into fight mode, flight mode, or freeze mode. You're just going to go into one of those modes. And we were forced in a lot of ways to go into flight because we were locked down and cut off from everybody else. And we were put in that state because we were told that there is this existential threat, and if you leave your house, you'll die or you'll be responsible for someone else's death. And so when you experience something like that, you're mentally going to go into fight or flight mode. So or freeze. Well, guess what you can't do when you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode? You can't have relationships with people.
Sure.
Because you're in urgent, emergency, I have a crisis and I have to respond. And I mean, like God gave us fight or flight because, there would be situations where we really needed to be afraid so that we could be, so we could survive.
Sure.
Right. So, we talked about this at church earlier this year with a psychologist. Basically, if you come across a bear in a forest, fight, flight, or
Get out of the
freeze is like
forest.
the best thing that could happen to you. Like, you don't want to sit there and sort of decide what to do.
Sure.
You don't want to sit there and analyze the situation. No, you need to emergency, urgent, act, run away, fight back, or go hide and, whatever. And I think that we were put in that state, and mentally we were not meant to survive in that state of being for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen
We
studies on top of that say, I think it was 13 IQ points that
You lose.
You lose when you're under stress.
We just
So-
yeah,
so you have
totally.
a whole-
So we're stupid.
you have a whole
We've all
world.
become dumb.
Yeah, a whole
But maybe we
stressed out
have.
world.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's outrageous that the entire world can be in that same state at the same time.
At the same time. And so what was really interesting that the psychologist said was when the first protests turned into rioting and looting, she said, I wasn't surprised at all. She said, because when you've been in flight mode or freeze mode, the pendulum's gonna swing and it's gonna come out and you're gonna see outbursts and fight is going to rise to the surface. And she said, I didn't know that it was going to be about racial injustice, but I knew that that would come. And I don't think that, and this is me not being very optimistic, but I don't think that that's ended. And I think that the more that we're fed fear, the more that we're going to react with fight. And I'm not saying that there's not a legitimate reason to have, a response to the pandemic. But what I'm saying is when we're mentally in this state of duress and stress and fear, we're going to have these emotional swings that are not going to make sense. They're not going to be rooted in a lot of intellect, but they're going to be these emotional things that are going to surface with violence and rage and, and let alone looting. But the other statistic that has just skyrocketed since lockdown is the divorce rate. So it's like we're fighting, we can't get along, and we're destroying the fabric of our lives in the process.
Yeah. So you touched on living out of fear, because I hear that I hear that thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
What do you do when your belief is that the fear has real, like it's coming from a real place?
Yeah. Right. Like there's
So
a
you can't
legitimate reason to
I just
be
feel
afraid.
like any time that someone is opposite of an opinion, you say, well, you're just doing that out of fear, which I think we
yeah.
all react out of that, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's not illogical.
Yeah.
So how do you,
Like sometimes there's a real reason to be afraid.
yeah, how on one hand do you take your whatever it is that you're afraid of, and on the other hand want to be able to live in a healthy way still?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and a lot of times, like in the Christian world, we're presented with this binary option. You're either living in fear or you're going to live in faith.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Well, and I think that those two things are, in some ways, opposites. Not in all ways, but in some ways, opposites. And it is true that we ought to be living out of faith and not paralyzed by fear.
Sure.
It's true.
It sounds great, but
Yeah. So what about facing real crises, right? And here's where I think that we need a shift in our thinking about God and about life. We've been told that the end goal of life is happy, wealthy, and safe. Like we've been told that that's the goal of life, to be happy, to be wealthy, and to be safe. And we've especially, I would probably assume to say that most people in a Western society have that similar framework, but I think that's very also American. That the American dream. What's the American dream?
pursuit of happiness. I mean, at
It's the
least,
pursuit of happiness, and
I
it's
guess you're right, right?
you're right. But I think I've heard the American dream explained a lot as you own a home, and you were more wealthy than your parents.
Yeah, you're not seeing that these days.
And you equipped your children to be more wealthy than you. And that is a great thing. Like, I'm not saying that that's bad. Like, I don't think God wants his kids suffering and struggling and unable to eat. You know, like how awesome is it that we've had an economic run over the last 200 years that has resulted in incredible amounts of prosperity. I mean, so there's some really good things to that. And, you know, I'm not trying to throw that under the bus, but we've had the whole ambition in life that the whole goal, like the whole place that we're trying to end up is to be happy, to be wealthy. And we think, wrongly so, that those two things correlate, that if I'm wealthy, then I'll be happy.
Sure.
Right? But not really true. But we're taught that. And to be safe. And we have put safety on this massive pedestal. And we've said that safety is, you know, one of the most important values and one of the most important objectives. But I would say that makes sense for someone who is not a believer. When you believe in Jesus and you believe in the plan of God on the earth and you believe ultimately in what God's plan is for good and evil and the triumph of good over evil in the last days, when you believe all of that, happy, wealthy, and safe don't make sense anymore. And I think that
You're talking
Christianity
about physically
has missed it.
safe?
I think that Paul in the New Testament never prioritized safety. He prioritized getting people to heaven. That's why you see him being beat up, see him running into, you know, cities where he's going to be stoned to death. He knew he was going to be arrested and executed, you know, and he went to a place where that was going to happen, right? I'm not saying that we should neglect safety.
Okay.
You know, I'm not saying just be stupid, right? Like, I'm not anxious to jump off the top of this building and I still buckle my children into car seats correctly because I don't want them to get hurt in an accident. So I also pursue things that generate more income into my life, right? So I'm not saying that any pursuit of wealth or safety or happiness is wrong. Those are all good things. What I'm saying is that when that becomes the priority, I think that we've totally misunderstood everything about God's purposes for our lives.
So, like, when you wake up in the morning, you're driving.
Motivation
isn't necessarily just to acquire wealth or acquire, you know, like a sturdy house that's safe.
Safety.
Your driving force is.
Yeah. So let me get into a little bit of the theology here. And this goes back to one of the questions I've been asked. It's like, is this the end of the world, right? Let me get into a little bit of the theology where the world is chaos. It is overrun with evil. It is tearing itself apart at the seams. And it has been that way since sin entered the world. That is part of the constant state of the world that we live in. And as a result of that, you have the hell that we're feeling in 2020. Little perspective, 2020 feels terrible to us, but if we were living in the dark ages, this would be pretty mild, pretty comfortable, right? If we were living under Roman occupation, this would be a dream come true. You know, so let's just be honest about the fact that in history, 2020 sure sucks for us, but all things considered, this is not the exception.
Yeah.
If anything, this is the more common, you know? So the reason why the world is that way is because sin entered the world and the whole world is dysfunctioning because it's been disconnected from God's perfect design. So Jesus comes into the world and Jesus comes into the world to give people the opportunity to reconnect to God's design and to reconnect to who they were always created to be. And he does that by overcoming sin, not in a external way, but in an internal way. Like my sin was overcome when I accepted what Jesus did for me on the cross. So now I am victorious over sin, right? And that's personal. And it's personal for you and personal for anyone who believes in Jesus. So we now have power over the hell that is in this world. And we basically were given, you know, two main objectives, I would say. One is to be in relationship with God, which now I can be because of what Jesus has done, and reconnected to the source, which is the source of life and the source of happiness and the real source of joy and all of that stuff. And the real source of safety, it's in the relationship with Jesus, right? And then I was given a mandate while I have time on this earth. And my mandate while I'm still here is to give every single person the opportunity to enter into the redemption that Jesus died to give them. Okay? So we're here to run to the mess, to fix the mess, to bring hope to the mess, to bring peace to the mess, and to give people an opportunity to understand that the mess doesn't have to dominate them. But this is temporary. And this is meant to be temporary because God is not going to keep putting up
You're talking about
the state of the world.
Yeah.
The state of the world is temporary, and you and I live under a temporary era of time where the world is still a mess, but we have a message of redemption. But this whole thing is supposed to have a finale. And the finale is God ending evil. And when he ends evil, everything is made brand new, and everything is restored back to what it was always meant to be, only better now.
Sure.
Because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. So this is a temporary moment in time. So if my priority in life is safety, I've forgotten that no one is safe here. You are not safe here. And also, you're going to die. Like, we're all going to die. But what counts is, what did we do with this time that matters for eternity? And that's why one of the most inspiring people on the earth right now are the people who run this organization called Preemptive Love. They go into war zones as ambassadors of Jesus, right? They go into war zones to find people who've been traumatized by war, and they help them rebuild their lives. Yeah. They go into war zones sacrificing their own safety to help people who are being traumatized by the war that is around them. That is what the Christian life is supposed to look like. And you know what? They could die doing it. And that's exactly the heart of the first Christians.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's okay if we die doing it because I'm really living for eternity. I'm not living for right now. As long as I'm here, I'm going to help fix what's wrong. But ultimately, I'm just trying to take what I can out of this hellhole and bring it into what Jesus is ultimately going to do, which is make everything brand new again. And so there's an urgent calling behind every single one of us. And I think 2020 is an example that we're getting close to the end. But I also think that there have been examples just as bad, if not much worse than 2020 for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And we should always be living like we are very close to the end.
So what I'm hearing is selfless love. Like, that should be our motivation.
That's the gospel.
And maybe even that's the antidote to feeling like you're going crazy. If you feel like you're going crazy, maybe you're thinking about yourself a little too much.
I think that's possible. Like, well, one of the reasons why we get overcome by anxiety and depression is because we become so consumed with our feelings that we let our feelings dominate us.
Yeah.
What I would say is that when Jesus defeated sin, he defeated the curse of sin. And depression and anxiety are not God's plan. That's not to condemn people who are struggling with that. That's to give you hope, to say Jesus overcame this. So you don't have to be dominated by your depression and anxiety because Jesus gives you the power to overcome it.
So you hear that all the time, though. So,
Yeah.
okay, so I'm super anxious person. If Jesus overcame it, why am I anxious?
Yeah, well...
And how do I just overcome that?
Yeah. I mean, the simple answer is faith.
Okay.
But there's much more...
So I don't have faith then,
that.
I guess?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you can feed your faith or you can feed your fear. And so there are ways that you feed your faith that will help you to rise above what you're going through. And when you're overcome by the pain of this world, first of all, that's okay because the world is terrible.
Yeah.
But also there's hope. You don't have to stay there. And when you keep your eyes on Jesus, Jesus will help to remind you that when he died on the cross, he gave you what you needed to have peace and joy. And you have to keep reminding yourself that when your emotions don't line up with what Jesus died to give you. Like, Jesus died to make that possible for you. There's nothing you can do to change that or undo that. But you do sometimes just have to remind yourself that you don't have to live here because Jesus has overcome this for you. I also think you'll fuel your faith by reminding yourself what Jesus has done. You'll fuel your faith by coming into corporate worship, by coming into church. You'll fuel your faith by being exposed to the Word of God. You'll fuel your faith by worshiping God, being in the presence of God. But one of the ways you fuel your faith, and Americans really downplay this, but one of the major ways that you fuel your faith is by being in relationship with people who you're honest with, who can help call out the BS in your own thinking. But that requires vulnerability, honesty, and it requires empathy. So I would just say, like, to people watching, yes, the world is terrible, but there is hope. But there's an urgent matter that we're meant to be about right now. Jesus has given us the power to rise above this, but Jesus has given us purpose within this too, So maybe some people need to unplug from social media because it's fueling your fear, not your faith.
Yeah. It does that very well.
I follow a lot of very inspiring people on social media. And sometimes that's inspiring, but even that, I think, can crush me more than help me sometimes.
Comparing yourself to them?
Comparing myself to them, but then it's like you go onto social media, you hear good voices saying positive things, but you also alongside of them hear all the crap too. So it's like, was there a net benefit? I don't know.
Yeah.
So what do you think? How do you navigate a world like 2020 without losing it?
I don't know that I did or am.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting better at recognizing it, and I think that's the big thing is seeing things that you're struggling with and identifying that.
Yeah. For sure.
And man, I don't know. I feel like multiple times this year I felt like I was on an island.
Yeah.
And I had this strong, well-developed, I thought, idea in my head of what I thought of the world and what I thought of things, and I didn't understand why other people around me weren't 100% agreeing. Like, not just like, wishy-washy, but like.
So you became more polarized.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, we all did.
100%.
Yeah.
And I caught myself immediately just thinking the worst of the opposite. Like, instead of just disagreeing.
One of the things the audience should know, me and Mike have known each other for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, we process the world in almost entirely opposite ways, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the conversation with you. But I tend to be very optimistic, very full of faith. You tend to look for problems. And that's one of the ways that God made you, because he's given you the ability to solve a lot of problems. And that's one of the ways God made me, because he's made me to be someone who's constantly calling people towards a better future, right? So, like, that's part of who we are. But I'm not surprised to hear you say what you're saying, that I'm over here saying, just have faith. And you're like, yeah, so what? How do I do that?
Yeah.
So, but that's one of the good things.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's been identifying the things that I'm struggling with. And actually,
that's really good.
Because if I don't do that, they just run wild.
Yeah.
And I think when we start to isolate, even if it's with a group of people that we think that, so like on my social media feeds, I would start following people that were, confirming my biases.
That's what you do.
This person's crazy, so I'm just going to mute them. This person's saying exactly what I think, so obviously I'm going to listen to a lot more of that. And I think there's, I like to learn things. I like to collect information, but there is definitely a problem when you're only talking to people that have the same opinion as you.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think what you said about basically just being selfless. I think that my worst times are when I'm all about my problems. And I think that's what 2020 has done a lot to a lot of people. Everyone kind of feels personally attacked by what is happening.
Fight or flight. Yeah. I mean, we literally all do.
All of our lives have changed.
Yeah.
And I think taking it as a personal attack has been a lot of our problems.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, whatever is going on in the world, we're all experiencing this together, and I wish this was something that we were unifying around a little bit more than feeling this is about how it affects me.
Yeah.
So I think that's inspiring, and that's challenging to think more about how this is affecting other people around me rather than my personal inconveniences.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
sincere problems. I mean, this is having horrible effects on people that are sincere, but could we take that and look at the people around us more than us? I think that's great.
I think maybe like if we land the plane today, because I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, and we'll have more episodes. But like, I think if we could land the plane today, I think that my encouragement to everyone would be, first of all, there's hope. You don't have to be crushed by all of this. Jesus is going to make everything right, and you've got a mission while we wait for that, right? And the mission is to bring redemption where there's problems. So there's hope. That's the one thing is there's hope. But the second thing I'd really want to say to people is you have to have a couple people in your life who you're able to be in a real relationship with. You know, you have to have someone who you're willing to talk to and be honest about what you're feeling, what you're going through. And those people need to be people who are going to fuel your faith, you know, and not people who are going to like just add on problems, but who are going to fuel your faith. And those relationships can happen on Zoom. Like, you know, it's not like you don't use social media at all. The decision really is about, though, will you be real and honest with someone?
Yeah.
And is there someone who you can be real and honest with in return? And I think that that's the challenge. Like, can we have real, honest relationship with at least start with somebody. Start with somebody. What I think a lot of people will be afraid of, though, is that if they try to open up with someone, that won't be reciprocated. And what I would just say is, don't let that talk you out of it, because the truth is that every single person is hungry for the same thing.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking for that. And everyone's a little afraid to do that. But you've got to break that wall down in order to really, I think, be in a place of like true peace. Any final thoughts on that?
No, I mean, just when you are entering into a new relationship with someone, especially on a deeper level like that, I think there is something to say about being genuinely interested in what they are, like being vulnerable, but being still able to hear the other person.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if you just kind of
unload,
that's not actual true. I mean, I guess that is true vulnerability, but it's not. It's not an empathetic
it's not
relationship,
relationships.
And that's what will last more than one conversation.
But if you're at a crisis point, you really just need to unload on someone. Also, great Christian therapists are like, that's what they do. So that could be a really great option. Yeah. There's nothing to reciprocate there, but you can really unload, right? Yes. So if you need to do that, do it. Yes. Like, it's okay. But ultimately, the long term, you've got to have a healthy relationship with someone. So hey, let me just pray over everyone watching. Jesus, I thank you so much that you care about every single person so deeply. You know their pain, their trauma, their anxiety. You know how difficult it's been for them to process the things that they've had to process. Jesus, you know every detail, and you're not mad at them. But you've got hope for them. And Father, I pray that right now people would start to sense your peace lifting burdens off of their shoulders. And they would sense your love circling all around them, pulling them closer to you. And I thank you, Jesus, that you have defeated depression and anxiety. And God, I pray for everyone watching that they will see their faith fueled so they can really take hold of what you've already won for them and on behalf of them. And I would just rebuke the spirit of anxiety. It has no place over people who've been saved by Jesus. And I thank you, Father, that you're going to give us victory. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you tuned in today. Listen, God has an incredible, incredible story ahead for you, marked with His love and His goodness. Listen, why don't you go ahead and like the video? It helps other people see the video, and I believe that there's a message here that can help a lot of people. Also, subscribe to the channel so that you always see what's coming up here. And listen, we'd love for you to be a part of the Amplify family. Every single Sunday at 10, 1, and 6 Eastern Time, you can join us live on YouTube at the Amplify Church YouTube page to be a part of the Amplify family every Sunday. And if you'd like to be a part of what God's doing through Amplify, you can give at amplifychurch.com/give. I love you so much, and I am so glad that you are with me, and I believe that God has incredible things in store for you. See you soon.